Hello and welcome to the Dire Gentleman channel. My name is Gus Agarella.
And I'm Henry Galley, and this is our second video, and hopefully not the last, on analog horror. We know we promised to do the Walton Files next, and believe us, we're working on it, but something happened on April 1st, yeah!
Yeah, we got blindsided by a bit of a goof, by a bit of an April Fool's Day joke, which was Linkara of Atop the Fourth Wall fame releasing a full analog horror series that itself was not a joke.
I am shocked by how good this is, because, like, Linkara, obviously a very storied creator, part of the whole Channel Awesome thing, but split with it after they changed the channel stuff, understandably. A comics guy, made the Atop the Fourth Wall movie, stuff like that, but, you know, I never would have pegged him for a horror dude, and now I feel like he's pegged me.
Now, Linkara always struck me as, like, one of the sort of old internet-type creators with those, like, heavily continuity and storyline-focused review videos that were so popular back in the day with AVGN, Nostalgia Critic, like, all those guys. It's just always fascinating when I see someone from that era actually adapt to new forms of content, new modern era stuff, and that's exactly what Louis Lovhaug has done with this new Winter in 83 analog horror series.
Yes. Alright, so before we get deeper into this, Winter of 83 is a great series. If you need our recommendation before you're going in, you've got it. It's a great show. We will link the playlist down in the description, because while we obviously won't spoil everything, there is likely to just be mild spoilers as a result of us discussing this. So if you're the kind of person who's bothered by that, please go watch it beforehand, then come back to this. Because, yeah, he has weaved a genuinely fascinating, like, science fiction horror story here, which is not, in my opinion, common for analog horror. It's much more, like, supernatural stuff, like, all the different monsters in Gemini Home Entertainment, or the alternates in the Mandela Catalog, which have more of, like, a religious feeling to it, but this is, like, hard sci-fi.
It really is, and I love the framing device he chose for this, which was a, like, public access channel that the signal keeps getting hijacked from outside. It really lends this, like, kind of, like, chilling, pun fully intended, atmosphere to the goings-on in this town as, like, a very cold winter approaches, and the public access station seems to be pushing for more funding, while they also routinely get hijacked by, like, incoming powerful signals from a mysterious and possibly sinister source.
Yeah, I think what's great about this, in terms of specifically analog horror as well, I think of any analog horror series I've seen, this one does the most with what it is and how well it integrates it, because this small town of is it Fawn Circle, Minnesota?
Fawn Circle, yeah, with a nice little logo for, like, the town and, like, the public access thing of, like, a little baby deer.
Yeah, and I believe it's in the credits that Fard Mohammed did a lot of the sort of, like, graphics for this, and fantastic job, because it looks so damn authentic.
Yeah, it looks like just really true to the public access aesthetic and, like, the, like, small town, like, Bureau of, like, Tourism sort of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of forgot which video we discussed this on, but I spoke briefly about a horror film called Spiral, which was an enjoyable film on the whole, but had a lot of flaws in terms of its kind of plotting, because you found that after watching it, and then in the end, kind of finding out the nature of the supernatural threat, a lot of the scares that preceded it didn't make a lot of sense. And honestly, that's also the case, I find, for a lot of online horror, where there's just a bunch of miscellaneous scares that you would maybe, if not fully engrossed, ask yourself, like, but why is it doing this? What's really clever, and I think this comes in from, like, Lewis's real attention to detail, is the fact that every single scare in this is cleverly integrated into the explanation and the true nature of the threat here and how it's manifesting.
Yeah, I think what was fascinating about the way that this was structured is that you had the bits with the detective Carl Denby, you had town hall recordings, and then you had other broadcasted programs from this public access station that either advertised a business or a location, and they were just subtly corrupted by this powerful signal that has been hijacking things.
Yeah, it reminded me of a much more intense version. There's a really fun movie that I recommend people check out on Halloween called WNUF Halloween Special, which is all designed to look like a VHS recording of a small town like Halloween news broadcast with all of these like authentic like 80s style ads in between. And Lewis really taps into that. And I think what I really like is it's able to use the kinds of scares that are very familiar with analog horror, stuff like, the corruption of the tape, frightening things with recordings of people's voices, and like, sudden like cuts away to like very ominous things juxtaposed with a more I suppose like mild context, like say an ad for a holiday retreat. I think it just has this like sheen of competence and professionalism. There are a few moments that are a bit shaky, like I think what jumps out to mind is the bit in the first episode with the recording of the true scientist in the basements of Scott's Manor.
Yeah, I think the thing too is that like analog horror doesn't usually lend itself to like live actors performing, so it kind of disrupts the aesthetic.
Yeah, that's the thing, because I think it's one thing to treat raw footage or footage without people to give it that VHS look, but the fact is, between eras, and analog horror is largely sort of like mid to late 80s and early 90s, there is such a look to the way, like, people dressed, people held themselves, people like styled their hair, that the second you see someone and you're like, that's a modern person, it immediately can like hurt your immersion in a thing.
It is unfortunate that like, one of those few moments that breaks the aesthetic is right up front,
Mm.
but the thing is, as you sort of put more distance away from that moment, and as the thing really fully becomes itself, you end up just entirely being engrossed as it builds towards this really satisfying and terrifying climax.
Yeah, I completely agree, because if anyone feels a little bit about that opening, I insist you persevere despite, because it genuinely kind of gets better every single episode.
I think this is like the most I've ever been afraid of like a speak and spell voice
Yeah.
in a very long time. The monster in this is really effective, and once you fully realize what it is, you're like, that's so creative, but also I would hate if that was real. I'd be terrified if that were real.
Exactly, because without giving it away, the genius of kind of what Lewis has done here is taking something so common and so mundane and imbuing it with great horror. I think that's the problem that a lot of horror that doesn't really work has, is it can often go too abstract, too removed from something you're likely to encounter, and people start to get comfortable because they're just like, well, what's the chance that I'll run into that?
Yeah, whereas this was very much grounded in, I mean, winter is right there in the title. This is so grounded in the idea of a small mountain town being overrun during a horrible, like, series of blizzards. In survival situations, the buildings you're in, the level of protection you have from the elements, all of those things are crucial if you want to get through the winter. And there's references throughout the plot to like neighboring cities not even giving them extra plows because they're using them on their own streets. And you really get the sense of like, yeah, one tough winter can really mess up an entire town. And in this, that's elevated to such a horrifying place where like the baseline fear is there, but the abstracted fear feels still within the realm of possibility.
You're completely right, Gus, and I hadn't even really considered the full extent of that until now. It is taking such a primal fear And without giving it away, it is, like, to an extent, the fear of the elements, and it's you could classify this as like environmental horror because it is just about that feeling of like you said, realizing that no matter the control that we as people think we have over our environment, nature itself, the world that we are in, is still ultimately so much more powerful than us. And at any given time, regardless of what we've built, we are often only sort of one bad winter away from it all being gone.
Yeah, and it's got this really fascinating thing that I love in horror, where like as you alluded to, nature is so much more powerful than us, and it's similar to that film Annihilation, in which what if the kind of like unstoppable, unpredictable, inhuman elements of nature had an intent all their own, and they acted that intent upon us in a way that becomes more human as we become more like it. And it kind of blends humanity and nature in a way that becomes utterly disturbing. And because it's with intent, you end up sort of resenting and hating the thing responsible even more. But then it also doesn't feel fair, similar to the alternates.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And that does seem to be what you just touched on there, Gus. A running thing that we're seeing in a lot of analog horror, which is this feeling of unfairness. Like there is such a degree of hopelessness and like weightedness that kind of borders on the vibes of cosmic horror. And horror has quite a rich history of being a social reflection of the time it comes out in. And I think analog horror, which we're seeing a renaissance in right now, does reflect, I think, the feelings of powerlessness to affect your situation that is all too common in the modern age. This feelings of like, why is this happening to us? It's not fair. We're suffering from decisions that weren't ours, and it feels like we have no control over the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that especially works within this genre because it's borrowing like an older template of horror, an older aesthetic, which kind of puts in our minds the idea of like, well, were we more in control back then, or was it then where the seeds of our lack of control were planted?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. The whole quote about, no longer products of our environments are products of us. But that does lead to a degree of helplessness when elements of the environment we didn't make encroaches and sort of reasserts its power. And that, I think, is a major theme here.
Yeah, and it really begs the question, like, who is us? Like,
Yeah.
what are we really?
Yeah, and in this case, much like the alternates, this question of examining like who we are is brought even further into that horror space by monsters that have an explicit intention to mimic or to take over. There are so many really interesting influences here. Like there's definitely a number of influences from things like Resident Evil with like the underground labs and things like that. There is I think there are shades of the alternates to the villains of this, but there's also definitely the episode that's a kind of advertisement for the like holiday place really feels like a quite explicit allusion to Gemini Home Entertainment, but it also has that kind of epistolary science horror, body horror vibes of things like a book I really enjoy called The Troop by Nick Cutter, which does this kind of thing. Like, it's so familiar in so many ways, but as we often say on this channel, it's clever because it configures its familiar influences into something that feels so new despite its familiarity.
This is it's just still so fascinating that this came from Linkara, and I really hope he does more of this stuff in the future. It's a feeling similar to like, when anybody who mostly has done like comedy or like, supposed like, not real art, and I'm doing big, heavy scare quotes, branches out and does some kind of narrative storytelling thing, especially in an entirely new genre. It's really cool, and I'm glad that this was brought to our attention because it's recent, and I think people should really look at this.
Yeah, genuinely. For like a series of this quality from an established creator, it's shocking how little traction it's gotten. I mean, the best compliment anyone can give. I wish there was more of it.
There very well could be. I mean, there was like a potential teaser trailer at the end, but to its credit, there feels like there's a kind of natural ending point for the threat, a natural way that it can be out, in a way that reminded me a lot of War of the Worlds.
Yes. Whether or not you want to make the argument that it's specifically alien, it is alien in nature and in its kind of metaphorical resonance of its like relationship with humanity. And as such, like you said, the fact that like, you know, the very kind of like rules of nature that empower it are also the ones that kind of disempower it with you know, the passing of time. But like you said, it's all about the fact that like, you know, yeah, the threat may abate eventually. The question is, will you live that long?
Yeah, exactly. And I just want to say this one other thing before we, sort of wrap this puppy up, give our full recommendation is on the record at this point. But when it came to the alternates of the Mandela catalog, I locked my door at night. When it comes to the threat from winter of '83, I know that locking my door will do nothing.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to do with these feelings of fear, just other than to feel them and be happy that summer is approaching at the moment.
Yeah, and that's the great thing. Ultimately, it leaves you with something. Like, I know I'm going to be thinking about this for a while, and like I often experience after a great piece of art, it makes me want to create. If you have watched it, and we really recommend you do, obviously, please let us know what you thought of it down in the comments, and we'd love to hear it. Be sure to like spread it around, give it the love it deserves. If you enjoyed it, recommend it to people, because at the end of the day, even in our hyper-connected internet world of algorithms and ads and whatever, there is still no more powerful method of spreading something around than word of mouth.
Yeah, no, we had a great time with it, and we would love more attention on this, and we would just love to hear what you thought. Be like us. You will be like us.
You will be like us. I'm so cold.
You will be
I'm so
like
cold.
us.
I'm so cold.
I'm so
I'm
cold.
so cold.
I'm so
I'm so
cold.
cold. I'm so cold.